Now, you've been to Okinawa quite a number of times, and I've spent a little bit of time there. Okinawa is considered a blue zone, right? They have in certain portions of Okinawa, population that contains, I guess, let's just call it the per capita highest percentage of centenarians or something along those lines. What are some of the lessons you've taken away from that or observations that you've made?
Well, it's such a different world there. You know, they live in a Pacific paradise with clean water and air. They have an unbelievably varied, fascinating diet, very different from the Japanese diet. They get physical activity. But one of the things that most struck me was the different attitude toward aging in that society, that old people are valued as national treasures. Efforts are made to include them in all aspects of social life. Very different from what you see here, you know, where we like to isolate old people with other old people and not have to deal with them. One of the stories I collected over there is that a common cause of sibling fighting in traditional Okinawan society is over who is going to get to take care of the aging parents. That's a little different from what we see here. So I think that's extremely important. I took my mother there when she was, I think, 89 or 90. I was invited to give a talk at a conference in Okinawa, and they like to trot out their centenarians at all events. So there was a bunch of them at an opening party, and they would all come up to my mother and say, "I'm 101. How old are you?" And she was very embarrassed about her age. And I think it was interesting to watch her be in a culture where people were proud of being old. So that's one of the lessons I learned.
I spent a bit of time, I want to say 4 or 5 days, in this village called Ogimi.
Yes,
in
I know
Okinawa.
it well, right.
Yeah. So Ogimi is sort of the creme de la creme of the centenarian Olympics. And every person I met who seemed to be, say, in their 90s or 80s, 90s or beyond, I would ask, what's the secret? And I got back a different answer from just about everybody.
I'm sure.
But there were a few things that closely line up with what you're saying. One was old people were active. I mean, people were out in the gardens. People were members of choral societies. We had a driver at the time for a couple of days, and he would say, well, I'm still young. I'm still a young whippersnapper, basically. And he was in his mid-80s. And we drove by a number of places where he would point out, and he'd say, that's where the old people just sit inside watching television. That's the end. He's like, that's when it's over. And it really seemed to be, as you mentioned, the inclusive nature of senior living in that area, and also the fact that they're very engaged with community and very, very active. I remember going to market where they have the purple taro, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the diet is it's becoming more Japanicized, but it's very different from what we typically think of as Japanese food.
But I have to tell you, Tim, that over the period of time that I was going to Okinawa, Okinawan longevity has plummeted, especially among men.
Yeah.
And that's been attributed entirely to the increasing consumption of American fast food. And I remember there was an article in the New York Times about that, and they quoted a middle-aged Okinawan man who said the first time he tasted a McDonald's hamburger, he thought he had died and gone to heaven. I mean, how could that be? I mean, these people have the most wonderful food available, but there you go. In just such a short space of time, you can see the effects of that.